Christian Horner's ultimate revenge against Red Bull has just been leaked. After a series of shocking secret talks with Ferrari, the future of the sport could be about to change forever. What was said behind closed doors? What role does Lewis Hamilton play in all of this? Stay until the very end. This video is exactly what you've been waiting for. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. After 20 years of constructing a dynasty that reshaped the very architecture of modern Formula One, Christian Horner's dramatic and sudden removal from Red Bull racing has detonated a seismic shift whose shockwaves continue to reverberate throughout every corner of the paddock. For 2 relentless decades, Horner was not merely a team principal, he was the unshakable core of Red Bull's identity, the sharp strategist behind its dominance, the public face in times of triumph and controversy alike. His leadership wasn't just stable, it was untouchable. Yet, almost overnight, that seemingly indestructible reign collapsed beneath the weight of betrayal, infighting, and a complete erosion of the foundations upon which his empire had been built. What unfolded behind the polished veneer of Red Bull's success was not just a transition of leadership, it was a complex and corrosive implosion driven by political ambition, internal manipulation, and shifting alliances that ultimately left Horner vulnerable and isolated. The official statement announcing his dismissal came without warning, coded in neutral language and corporate restraint, offering no real substance, no emotion, and certainly no closure. Yet to those who had observed the subtle changes in tone, the increasing absence of unity during race weekends, and the veiled expressions during press conferences, it was clear that this was not the result of one single moment, but rather the crescendo of a long-brewing storm. Inside Red Bull, power had slowly begun to gravitate away from Horner's traditional sphere of control. The once symbiotic relationship between Horner and Helmut Marko had soured significantly, punctuated by philosophical disagreements, generational divergence, and growing unease over who truly held the reins of authority. At the center of this growing polarity stood the Verstappen family, most notably Jos Verstappen, whose blunt communication style and growing influence within the team hierarchy transformed him from vocal supporter to strategic adversary. Jos, never one to bite his tongue, had begun to express disdain for Horner's approach, accusing him behind closed doors of leveraging the team's success to enhance his own legacy, brand, and political capital within the sport. These weren't casual criticisms, they were cutting, personal, and persistent. Conversations between key Red Bull personnel became increasingly tense. Meetings, once collaborative and forward-looking, devolved into passive-aggressive exchanges and under-the-surface jabs. Decisions about car development, power unit evolution, and even driver management were no longer clear-cut. Technical departments found themselves caught between competing factions, one orbiting around Horner's central leadership, and another aligning with the Verstappen-Marko axis, a growing force that no longer saw Horner as essential to Red Bull's future. What had once been an empire built on cohesion was now slowly fragmenting into competing camps, each jockeying for control over resources, personnel, and strategic direction. As these tensions deepened, the atmosphere inside Red Bull became almost unrecognizable. Whispers of disloyalty and clandestine meetings began to circulate. Engineers started to report subtle changes in workflow hierarchies. Project leaders found themselves reassigned without clear explanation. Senior figures began distancing themselves from Horner in public engagements, opting for neutrality or silence rather than public alignment. And behind it all, Max Verstappen, though publicly restrained, was reportedly growing increasingly disenchanted with the turbulence brewing off the track, frustrated that internal politics were beginning to contaminate what should have been another season of clear dominance. The heart of the internal unrest lay not in disagreements about pace, upgrades, or technical regulations, but in trust, or the sudden absence of it. Red Bull's leadership had long prided itself on operating like a tightly run ship, decisive, agile, and brutally efficient. But as the Verstappen-Marko faction grew bolder and Horner's support base shrank, cracks in that armor began to show. There were reports, never officially confirmed but whispered with increasing frequency, that Horner had attempted to bypass certain internal committees, that he had been less transparent in communicating major decisions, and that he had begun cultivating external allies in the media and among FIA officials to counterbalance his dwindling internal leverage. What finally tipped the balance wasn't a single act of defiance or a public outburst. It was exhaustion. The organization, worn down by the constant push-pull of its internal power struggle, reached a point of fatigue. Red Bull, a team built on energy, clarity, and relentless forward motion, had become mired in bureaucracy, secrecy, and mistrust. When the final decision was made, it came swiftly and without negotiation. One morning, team members arrived at the factory to find a terse all-hands email. Christian Horner was no longer team principal. Effective immediately. No press conference. No farewell message. No celebration of his unmatched success. The paddock was blindsided. Rival teams, journalists, and even longtime Red Bull partners were left in disbelief. Horner's fingerprints were all over Red Bull's legacy. For consecutive championships with Sebastian Vettel, the reconstruction of the team's technical identity following the departure of Renault, the elevation of Max Verstappen from prodigy to reigning world champion, the transformation of Red Bull into the modern blueprint of success. All of that now seemed to vanish in a moment. The man who had stood shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Toto Wolff and Ross Brawn, who had navigated the political labyrinth of the sport with unmatched precision, was unceremoniously removed from the empire he had helped build from scratch. And yet, the silence that followed was even more deafening than the announcement itself. Horner disappeared from the public eye. No official statement. No televised reaction. Just an eerie void where one of the sport's most commanding voices had once been. Internally, Red Bull shifted into damage control mode, scrubbing messaging, reassigning spokespersons, and projecting continuity. But the vacuum left behind wasn't easy to fill. Senior engineers were rumored to be evaluating exit clauses. Sponsors, though still publicly committed, began asking for closed-door briefings. The Verstappen camp, emboldened by the power vacuum, began quietly pressing for additional influence over technical appointments and driver development pathways. For many within the sport, this wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the collapse of an era. Horner's legacy, though not without controversy, had defined an entire generation of racing. His battles with rivals, his outspoken nature, his sharp understanding of the sport's political machinery, and his relentless commitment to victory had made him a central figure in F1's modern evolution. His removal marks more than just a change in management. It represents a shift in the ideological DNA of Red Bull racing. The question now haunting the team is not whether they can maintain performance without him. It's whether they can survive the identity crisis his absence has triggered. Behind the scenes, Horner supporters have not entirely vanished. Some are reportedly regrouping, reaching out to alternative teams, even considering forming new alliances in other corners of the motorsport world. And as rumors swirl about legal disputes, contractual fallouts, and NDA breaches, one thing is certain: Christian Horner may be out of Red Bull, but he is far from finished. In a sport where narratives shift as quickly as lap times, the next chapter is already beginning to write itself, and it promises to be as volatile, strategic, and electrifying as the man at the center of it. Pre-Gunter, a ChatGPT. Even before any press release was circulated, before a single microphone was pointed in his direction or a camera lens captured the tremor beneath his carefully measured expressions, those who truly understood the undercurrents of Formula One had already sensed it. A shift was underway. Christian Horner's grip on Red Bull racing, an empire he had helped build from the ground up, was weakening, not with a dramatic collapse, but with the slow, quiet erosion that always precedes seismic change in this sport. The exodus didn't start with headlines. It started in silence. One by one, pillars of the team's technical foundation began walking away. First came Adrian Newey, the mastermind behind every championship-winning car of Red Bull's modern era. His decision was delivered with surgical precision. No drama, no public fallout, just a final set of signatures and the soft click of a door closing behind him. His departure sent shockwaves through the paddock not just because of what he represented, but because of what it implied. If Newey, the irreplaceable architect of aerodynamic genius, saw no future under Horner's guidance, what did that say about the stability of Red Bull's internal hierarchy? That alone would have been enough to cause unrest. But it didn't stop there. Within weeks, Rob Marshall, long considered one of the most innovative thinkers inside Red Bull's engineering division, confirmed he was leaving. Then came Jonathan Wheatley, a strategic giant in the operations realm, followed closely by Will Courtney, whose influence over the race engineering department had often been understated but never undervalued. Each of them represented not just years of experience, but trust, continuity, and cultural glue that held the team's high-performance machine together. As their desks emptied, so too did the illusion that everything was still under control. It wasn't. Something was cracking. And through all of this, Horner remained outwardly composed. He gave interviews with the same cadence, the same calculated charm, the same refusal to concede instability. He positioned each departure as part of a normal evolution, a natural consequence of long-term success. But those inside the paddock knew better. This wasn't evolution, it was fracture. And the fractures were converging on one man. Then, everything changed when the topic turned to Max Verstappen. The reigning four-time world champion, fierce, loyal, ruthless in his pursuit of performance, had begun to grow visibly detached. Gone was the spirited body language, the fire in the post-race briefings, the public defense of team decisions. He became quieter, sharper in private. His statements to the media were suddenly vague when asked about his future, his loyalty, his long-term goals. And for a driver like Verstappen, silence is never accidental. It's strategic. It's loaded. Whispers turned to full-blown speculation. Word began circulating that Toto Wolff had initiated multiple conversations with Verstappen's management. That meetings had taken place in Monte Carlo. That Mercedes, still searching for a successor to Lewis Hamilton's legacy, saw Verstappen not just as a prize, but as the key to their resurgence. What began as a rumor turned into a full-court pursuit, with Ola Kalinius himself, the powerful CEO of Mercedes-Benz, allegedly giving his personal authorization to make whatever financial and technical commitments were needed to secure Verstappen's signature. At Red Bull, panic started to take root. Verstappen wasn't just their lead driver. He was the cornerstone, the brand, the dynasty in motion. He wasn't replaceable. He was Red Bull. And if he left, everything, sponsorships, partnerships, the illusion of invincibility, would collapse like dominoes. That fear, that existential threat, triggered one of the fastest and most decisive internal power shifts the sport has seen in recent memory. According to multiple high-level insiders, Verstappen had made his stance crystal clear behind closed doors. No ultimatums in front of cameras. No grandstanding. Just one brutal final condition delivered with the icy calm of a man who knew exactly how much leverage he held. If Horner stays, I walk. And suddenly, the dam broke. The decision, when it came, was rapid and without ceremony. There were no drawn-out negotiations, no public farewell tributes, no slow phasing out. Horner, the longest-serving team principal in modern F1, the man who had built Red Bull from scrappy upstart to multi-title juggernaut, was removed. Just like that. The same leadership that once celebrated him as an irreplaceable figure now treated him as an expendable obstacle. It was cold, ruthless, but entirely logical. Red Bull had chosen its future, and its future was Max. But here's where the story refuses to follow a familiar path. Because for all the whispers about disgrace, about downfall, about Horner's empire crumbling beneath him, the truth may be something far more compelling. The very act that ended his reign at Red Bull could very well serve as the catalyst for a reinvention unlike anything the sport has seen. You don't survive in Formula One for as long as Horner did without understanding how to recalibrate, how to pivot, how to weaponize adversity into opportunity. Sources close to several rival teams have confirmed that Horner's phone didn't stop ringing in the hours after the announcement. Team owners, investors, manufacturers, some in F1, others watching from the periphery, wanted to know what he was planning next. Because while Red Bull may have cast him aside, the rest of the racing world hadn't forgotten his value. He was still the man who orchestrated title after title, who built winning machines, who managed egos and crises with surgical precision. That kind of mind doesn't retire. It reloads. And perhaps in losing everything at Red Bull, Horner has gained something more powerful: freedom. No longer shackled to internal politics or power struggles, no longer forced to manage personalities who questioned his authority, he now stands at the precipice of something far greater than mere redemption. He stands ready to begin again. To build, not rebuild. To launch something new. Whether it's with an existing team, a new manufacturer entering the sport, or a surprise partnership with someone who sees in him a blueprint for victory, one thing is certain: Christian Horner's story is not over. It's entering its next, and possibly most dangerous chapter. Because a man who's lost the kingdom he built will either disappear, or come back to conquer something even bigger. And if you know Horner, you already know which path he'll choose. Within moments of Christian Horner's abrupt and high-profile exit from Red Bull Racing, a flurry of speculation ignited across the paddock and social media alike, hinting that Ferrari had wasted no time in reopening channels of communication with the Englishman. Channels that, while once discreet and easily dismissed, were now pulsing with new urgency and unmistakable intent. Insiders quickly began whispering that these renewed talks weren't born overnight, but rather stemmed from a series of earlier clandestine exchanges that had taken place behind closed doors months prior. At the time, Horner had confidently turned down any possibility of leaving the Red Bull dynasty he'd helped build, brushing aside rumors with a trademark smirk and a half-joke about not speaking a word of Italian. That cheeky deflection, however, belonged to another era, an era in which Horner still wielded unquestioned authority in Milton Keynes and had every reason to believe his empire was untouchable. But everything had changed. Red Bull's internal shakeup, driven by conflicts that spiraled beyond repair, left Horner without a seat at the table he once commanded. The team that had dominated the grid for years had suddenly shown him the door, and in doing so, freed him from any professional or emotional loyalty. Stripped of his former titles yet still radiating ambition, Horner found himself at a crossroads where the path to Ferrari, Formula One's most storied, enigmatic, and emotionally charged institution, no longer looked like a distant fantasy, but a calling that was dangerously seductive. No longer constrained by Red Bull's internal politics or bound by long-term contracts, Horner was now a free agent with something to prove, and Ferrari, with all its chaos and complexity, was suddenly the perfect proving ground. The allure isn't just professional, it's visceral. Ferrari isn't just another team, it's a living legend, a symbol of racing mythology, and the ultimate challenge for any leader hungry for legacy. Leading Ferrari is not about prestige alone, it's about stepping into the heart of a machine that has broken the will of many and elevated the few who could master its contradictions. And for someone like Horner, whose career has been defined by control, precision, and relentless drive, the chance to resurrect a team gasping for direction is more than tempting, it's intoxicating. It is an invitation to take on not just a new project, but a sacred mission. Ferrari, for all its resources and heritage, is undeniably a team in turmoil. The once glorious red cars that were expected to battle tooth and nail with Mercedes and McLaren have, instead, found themselves slipping into a pattern of underachievement, marked not by total collapse but by maddening inconsistency. Frédéric Vasseur, who was handed the reins with high hopes and corporate backing, has struggled to impose authority or direction. Under his leadership, strategy errors, reactive decision-making, and internal indecision have become disturbingly frequent. A few scattered podium finishes have masked the chronic issues plaguing the Scuderia, issues that have little to do with speed and everything to do with leadership vacuum, unclear communication, and fractured priorities. Beneath the surface, Ferrari is no longer one team. It's two sides of a garage playing by different rules, answering to different influences, and often pulling in opposite directions. The Leclerc-Hamilton dynamic, which should have been a dream pairing of generational talent and legendary experience, has instead become a flashpoint for division. Charles Leclerc, long seen as the face of Ferrari's future, has leveraged his deep political ties within Maranello to solidify influence over the team's engineering direction. Meanwhile, Lewis Hamilton, arguably the most decorated driver of all time, has found himself increasingly isolated within his own operation. Internal documents leaked to a select few have hinted at a clear imbalance. Hamilton's feedback sessions have been shortened, his access to developmental briefings has been restricted, and crucial upgrades have consistently arrived at his side of the garage 1 or 2 race weekends behind Leclerc's. This erosion of equality has had a compounding psychological effect. Hamilton, who joined Ferrari in pursuit of one last monumental challenge, has slowly found himself sidelined in favor of a driver who, while immensely talented, appears to have become untouchable within the organization. The 7-time world champion, whose presence should command universal respect, now operates in a space where his words carry less influence than anticipated. Every missed upgrade window, every inconclusive strategy call, every veiled excuse during press briefings has contributed to an atmosphere in which Hamilton no longer feels like a centerpiece, but a high-profile accessory in a narrative that isn't his to control. And now, with Horner's name back in the conversation, that narrative could shift dramatically. Sources close to Ferrari's executive boardroom claim that John Elkann and Benedetto Vigna, who had until recently remained publicly loyal to Vasseur, are seriously reconsidering the entire leadership framework. Their internal patience, once projected to stretch until at least 2026, appears to be unraveling much faster behind the scenes. The mere availability of Horner has introduced a disruptive new variable into the equation, one that neither Elkann nor Vigna can afford to ignore. After all, they are businessmen first, and results matter more than sentiment. Ferrari cannot afford another decade of underperformance cloaked in romanticism. They need direction, credibility, and someone who understands how to turn chaos into clarity. Christian Horner brings more than just credentials. He brings gravity. He brings a track record of transforming potential into dominance. And crucially, he brings an ability to manage star drivers, diffuse egos, and enforce strategic discipline without losing the room. Managing Sebastian Vettel and then Max Verstappen, both demanding, fiery personalities, required a type of finesse few team principals possess. Horner doesn't just dictate, he orchestrates. He knows how to balance power across a garage, how to pit genius against genius without letting the structure collapse. That's the skill Ferrari has been missing for years. The mere thought of Horner at the helm, coordinating Hamilton and Leclerc with equal authority, bringing in his trusted technical minds, and reshaping Ferrari's culture from the ground up, has sent tremors through the Formula One world. Rival teams are already reassessing their long-term plans, and paddock insiders are speculating that such a move could destabilize the driver market, unsettle technical alliances, and even influence FIA politics. Ferrari, often criticized for being reactive rather than proactive, now stands at the precipice of a generational opportunity. For Horner, the appeal goes far beyond revenge or redemption. It's a chance to take everything he's learned, every controversy weathered, every championship won, every battle fought in the shadows of boardrooms and pit walls, and apply it to a team that has the raw ingredients but lacks the recipe. He would not be joining a stable operation, he would be joining a storm. But Christian Horner has never feared turbulence. He thrives in it. He understands that legacy is not built through comfort, but through chaos conquered. Should he accept Ferrari's offer, and many now believe it's no longer a matter of if, but when, Formula One could be on the verge of its most seismic reshuffle in years. And for Ferrari, it could be the moment the Scarlet team finally stops chasing ghosts of past greatness and begins writing a new chapter, one built not on nostalgia, but on ruthless, undeniable excellence. Christian Horner's legacy in Formula One is not just built on statistics, it's carved into the very structure of the sport's modern era. His track record goes far beyond the 4 consecutive world titles he captured with Sebastian Vettel, which already place him in the pantheon of the most successful team principals the sport has ever seen. Those years with Vettel were not simply about having the fastest car, they were a masterclass in maximizing performance, outthinking rivals, and maintaining dominance through relentless pressure. But even more telling than those golden years was Horner's ability to weather chaos and evolve. When the partnership with Renault fell apart in acrimonious fashion, he didn't let the cracks sink the ship. Instead, he pivoted. With surgical precision, he steered Red Bull through one of the sport's most difficult engine supplier transitions, navigating the political firestorm, rebuilding credibility, and aligning the team with Honda in a move that many at the time considered desperate. It turned out to be brilliant. That relationship with Honda was not just a lifeline, it was the resurrection of a team that had begun to fade from the title conversation. Under Horner's direction, Red Bull transformed from a squad with promise into an operational juggernaut, tactically sharp, strategically mature, and ruthlessly efficient. The apex of that resurgence came in 2021 and again in 2023, where he guided Max Verstappen to a championship in a car that, on paper, lacked the outright pace of its fiercest rivals. That title, won through relentless consistency, masterful pit wall decisions, and psychological warfare with Mercedes, was arguably the most complex, high-stakes chess match modern Formula One has seen. Horner didn't flinch. He thrived in it. That ability to win not just with speed, but with brains, adaptability, and nerve, elevated him from team principal to architect of dynasties. Now imagine a figure like that stepping into Maranello, not to inherit power, but to rebuild from the ashes. Ferrari, for all its mystique and pedigree, has stumbled repeatedly in recent years. Their cars have been fast, but flawed. Their strategies have ranged from overly conservative to catastrophically naive. Their internal culture has been marked by inconsistency, finger-pointing, and a lack of clear leadership. Bringing Horner into that environment wouldn't simply be a change in management, it would be a seismic cultural shift. He brings with him a blueprint for discipline, collaboration, and performance that Ferrari hasn't truly embraced since the early 2000s. He doesn't just manage personnel, he aligns every cog in the machine to a singular, unshakable objective: winning. But beyond the metrics and methodologies, there's a deeper, more emotional undercurrent to the idea of Horner at Ferrari. For him, this wouldn't just be about career progression. It would be the most poetic act of personal redemption imaginable. After years of pouring his soul into Red Bull, after being gradually edged out of the inner circle he helped construct, after watching the team he built from scratch grow cold to his presence, the opportunity to rise again, not in familiar territory, but at Ferrari, would be nothing short of mythic. This is a man who knows how to build empires, and now has the chance to rebuild one of the greatest in motorsport history. It's a shot at a second legacy, not tethered to the past, but forged in a completely new context, one with far more emotional weight and global scrutiny. And if that redemption arc is compelling for Horner, It's potentially transformative for Lewis Hamilton. These two were once on opposite sides of one of the fiercest rivalries in the modern era, locked in a battle that defined a generation of fans. Horner versus Toto. Max versus Lewis. Red Bull versus Mercedes. The tension was palpable, the rivalry venomous. And yet, here they are, no longer enemies, but unlikely allies. When news broke that Hamilton was making the unthinkable move to Ferrari, many speculated that the political dysfunction within the Scuderia would swallow him whole. But those assumptions were based on the old Ferrari, unsteady, disjointed, reactive. Horner's potential arrival would obliterate that version of the team. There are reports, unconfirmed but compelling, that Horner wasted no time after Hamilton's signing. Within days of the announcement, he allegedly made direct contact with the seven-time world champion. The message was simple: the manipulation, the whisper campaigns, the internal games that derailed seasons at Mercedes, they would not be tolerated under his watch. Horner offered something Hamilton hadn't had in years: a promise of clarity, of strategic purity, of a team where meritocracy replaced politics. That gesture, subtle though it may have been, could end up being the moment everything shifted. For Hamilton, it was not just reassurance. It was an invitation to finally breathe, to unleash his full capabilities without watching his back. The potential chemistry between the two cannot be overstated. Hamilton, now in the twilight of a career defined by relentless ambition and historic achievement, is searching not just for more wins, but for meaning. He wants to shape something enduring, to walk away from Formula One not just with numbers, but with narrative. Horner, having been burned by the machine he helped construct, is hungry to prove that his genius was never dependent on Milton Keynes. Together, they have the chance to rewrite what success looks like, not by replicating old victories, but by crafting new ones in the most pressurized, tradition-bound team on the grid. What makes this scenario even more electrifying is how much it defies convention. These are two men known for their pride, their stubbornness, their will to dominate. That they would not only collaborate, but potentially thrive together, speaks volumes about their evolution. It's not just about winning anymore. It's about purpose, legacy, and rewriting personal histories that were beginning to calcify. Their shared battle scars from the brutal Red Bull-Mercedes wars may be exactly what allows them to build something resilient and unified at Ferrari. A structure stronger because it's forged from the lessons of failure, rivalry, and survival. The grid would feel this shift immediately. Other team principals, other drivers, sponsors, analysts, they would all watch with a mix of awe and apprehension. Because a Ferrari team guided by Christian Horner and piloted by Lewis Hamilton is not just a competitive threat, it's a narrative tsunami. Every weekend will become a referendum not just on race pace or pit strategy, but on the very idea of reinvention. Every win would be a symbol. Every mistake, a test of how far they've come. And if it works, if this bold, improbable pairing turns Ferrari into the unstoppable force it has long aspired to be, then the history books will need to be rewritten. Not just with statistics, but with fire, redemption, and defiance. In the end, what Horner and Hamilton are chasing is not just victory. It's transformation. And that, more than any trophy, is what makes this possible alliance so dangerously compelling. The exchange between Christian Horner and Lewis Hamilton was not a routine debrief, nor was it a simple clarification of doubts. It was a raw, revealing, and transformative encounter between two individuals who had spent the better part of their careers navigating the treacherous currents of Formula One, often alone in their frustrations. What unfolded was not just an admission of past failures, but a moment of catharsis that had been building for years. Horner, uncharacteristically unguarded, laid everything bare. There was no spin, no corporate gloss, no effort to minimize the truth. He acknowledged in explicit detail what Hamilton had only whispered about in private for seasons, that within the walls of Ferrari, political forces had repeatedly worked against him. Upgrades that should have been his were instead redirected. Technical innovations developed with his input ended up on the other side of the garage. Strategic calls were often skewed. The pattern was undeniable. Hamilton's instincts had not betrayed him. He had been betrayed by a system designed to present the illusion of equality while quietly engineering advantage for his teammate. For Hamilton, the confirmation struck like a thunderclap. Though he had long suspected such manipulation, hearing it spoken with clarity, detail, and conviction by a figure as senior and respected as Horner brought the weight of truth crashing down on him. This wasn't paranoia, it was reality. And yet, within that painful acknowledgement, there was also a strange relief. For the first time, Someone wasn't just nodding sympathetically or dismissing his concerns as emotional overreactions. Someone had seen it, understood it, and called it by its name. There were no excuses offered, only a commitment, a pledge that things would never operate that way again under Horner's command. Horner did not just offer Hamilton sympathy. He presented a plan, one constructed not on sentiment but on restructuring every broken piece of Ferrari's internal architecture. His strategy was surgical: remove entrenched decision-makers whose biases had compromised team integrity, introduce third-party audits of development timelines to eliminate manipulation, and most importantly, abolish the hierarchy of favoritism that had disguised itself as meritocracy. He would surround the team with people who valued data over influence, performance over politics, and accountability over comfort. In his Ferrari, it would not matter how many Instagram followers a driver had, how many sponsor deals they carried, or who was the face of a marketing campaign. The stopwatch would decide everything. Hamilton listened intently. The man who had carried the weight of suspicion and frustration for years now stood in front of a leader willing to burn down the old scaffolding in order to build something real. It wasn't just that Horner believed in him, it was that Horner was willing to fight for a structure where belief wouldn't be necessary, because fairness would be automatic. The emotion between them was not born of past friendship or future ambition. It was forged in a moment of shared recognition. Both had been let down by the machine in different ways, and both were ready to re-engineer the future from the ground up. Meanwhile, far away from that private conversation, the empire Horner left behind was beginning to crumble. Red Bull, the dynasty he had meticulously built year after year into a fearsome, methodical machine, now stood without its architect. In his place, Laurent Mekies, though competent, lacked the gravitas and unified command Horner had always wielded. What once functioned like a singular organism, precise, focused, and relentless, was suddenly fragmented, uncertain, and vulnerable. Internal divisions that Horner had kept in check began to resurface. Conflicting agendas emerged. Whisper networks that had been silenced under his reign began to hum again. Even more concerning was the growing uncertainty around Max Verstappen's long-term loyalty. With Horner no longer there to provide the strategic vision and emotional containment the team had leaned on, Verstappen's relationship with Red Bull entered uncharted waters. The trust, once absolute, began to erode quietly. Rumors swirled not only about potential offers from rival teams, but about growing discomfort within Red Bull itself. For a driver as ruthlessly focused as Verstappen, any sign of instability is not tolerated. It is interpreted as a signal to move. And should he go, Red Bull wouldn't just be losing a driver. They'd be losing the final piece of the foundation Horner spent decades perfecting. If Verstappen does choose to depart, the torch will pass to younger, untested talents like Isaac Hadjar or Ayumu Iwasa. Talented though they are, they would not be walking into the fortress that once dominated Formula One. They would be entering an organization in flux, uncertain of its identity, unsure of its direction, and stripped of the leadership that once held everything in balance. Horner's departure has not just left a vacancy, it has opened a void that no one, at least not yet, seems capable of filling. The tightly managed operation that once outthought and outfought everyone on the grid has become reactionary, scattered, and susceptible. Across the paddock, the balance of power has begun to shift. And in this vacuum of control, Christian Horner has re-emerged not as a man seeking redemption, but as a force now unshackled by the limitations of his previous role. He is no longer bound to protect an existing dynasty. He is free to build something new, something of his own design, without compromise. The hunger that once built Red Bull into a powerhouse hasn't diminished, it has intensified. Armed with knowledge, experience, and an almost personal mission to prove that success can be rebuilt anywhere, Horner has become more dangerous than ever. He's not chasing past glory, he's chasing transformation. And he now has a driver in Hamilton who shares that exact desire. Formula One rarely sees revolutions happen in real time, but the seeds of one are already sprouting. While Red Bull teeters on the edge of uncertainty, Ferrari is beginning to awaken. The scars of dysfunction haven't vanished, but they are being treated, not ignored. The mistakes of the past are not being repeated, they're being dissected, understood, and used as fuel for something new. And at the center of this awakening are two figures. One, a leader whose grip on power was questioned and then removed. The other, a legend whose fire was almost extinguished by the politics of racing. Together, they now represent the most compelling story on the grid. Not because of what they've done, but because of what they still intend to do. Horner may no longer sit at the helm of Red Bull, but the shockwaves of his next move are already being felt. He was never simply a manager of people or an organizer of operations. He was a strategist of human dynamics, a builder of systems that didn't just work, but dominated. Now, with no chains and no limits, he is preparing something that may alter the competitive landscape once again. The paddock may not fully grasp it yet, but the silence before the storm is already here. The next era isn't just approaching, it's being engineered, tested, and fine-tuned behind the scenes. And when it arrives, it will have Christian Horner's fingerprints all over it.